Floors. You remember floors upon floors of vast, derelict rooms that are all reflections of something you know, but when you try to discern what you're really seeing, you find that it's more alien than familiar. Was it always this way? Or did I just misremember? Was I the problem this whole time? This is the premise which the 2026 Backrooms movie by Kane Parsons and A24 is hinged upon. And I have to say that I think that using the concept of the Backrooms is perfect to deliver the story of, well, of course, Clark, but perhaps more importantly, Dr. Mary Klein. This video is not spoiler-free, so consider this your formal warning. Today, I want to talk a bit about my own interpretations of the behaviors and appearances of both the entities, as well as the newly generated spaces within the 2026 Backrooms movie. As of writing this, I just saw it last night, so this is mostly going to be me shooting off the hip while it's still fresh. Myself, as well as many others, are equally intrigued and horrified by this fella, who is perhaps the liveliest entity that the entirety of the Kane Pixels Backroom saga has shown us. Superficially, Captain Clark's face, by the way, that's how I'm going to refer to him, he's going to be Captain Clark, and the original shall henceforth be known as Clark. Anyways, superficially, Captain Clark is the closest approximation of a human that the complex has been able to conjure. His face is nearly symmetrical, with 2 eyes, 1 nose, and 1 mouth. He has 2 hands that appear to have an appropriate amount of fingers, kinda, and he appears to be in pain constantly. That surprised, almost desperate stare never leaves his face, at least not from what I've seen. Captain Clark is also the most violent entity featured in the film, and I think I know why, but before we get into Captain Clark himself, let's look at the other life forms the movie has on display. The first we see is this shadowy entity as captured by an async researcher, who we don't get a great look at, but I think this is actually Captain Clark, given his overall legginess and the shape of the hat. Then we have Archibald Leland Sutter, my favorite guy. I love him. Look at him. Wow. This diva, I'm gonna call her Red on account of her having red hair and also her clothes being red. And this guy, who I'm gonna call Six Eyes, because he has 6 eyes, as well as Miss Mary, distinct from Dr. Mary, since I don't think any certificates awarded within the Backrooms hold any weight back in standard. Despite their terrifying introduction, Archie and Red are totally harmless, maybe even curious. The first time we see the two, they appear to simply be reacting to their surroundings. Red, though she gets chased, does nothing to harm Clark. It seems like she only wanted a closer look, and maybe Archie felt the same way, turning the light on so he could see Clark. While their curiosity could just as easily be explained as being any kind of neutral response to stimulus, their fear definitely is not. Red is able to sense Captain Clark before anyone else and immediately flees, while Archie, presumably unable to move on his own, can only turn his lamp on and off in distress. That's his only defense. Maybe this is why when Clark first finds Archie and Red, they're huddled near a Christmas tree, the only source of light other than Archie's lamp. Maybe they felt that this was some kind of safe haven for them, not only because of the light, but perhaps they do have at least the remnants of memory. Maybe they recognize this artifact and are able to find some comfort in it. Comfort that Clark inevitably disrupts, over and over again. It's just the way he's wired, after all. As for Six Eyes, he is completely passive. I don't think he blinks once while we see him. He is unmoving and entirely uncaring. Not when Clark literally pulls out his insides to eat, and not when Captain Clark wraps his jaws around the original Clark. I think that Clark is right when he describes the reason for each of these entities being here now as they are, existing as memories of people who exist somewhere out there in the world. I'm assuming that these people must exist within decently close proximity to the Backrooms themselves in order to have been replicated with the level of detail that they each are. I think the clarity and liveliness of each entity is proportional to the person's proximity to the complex, as if the complex needs to get a good enough look at each person to be able to replicate them in a more meaningful or accurate way. A person that only leaves a vague impression of a memory gives us a life form like Six Eyes, one that's completely immobile and hollow, nothing inside but stuffing. Compare this to a person that is intimately connected and physically close to the Backrooms like Clark. The Backrooms know him well, and it's able to produce a creature that is flesh and bone, not unlike any other human. In terms of in-universe lore, it makes sense that Clark, if his internal state is indeed reflected back into the Backrooms, and by association the entities that manifest within it, has a hand in the way that each entity behaves, more specifically, how realized they really are. I think that the entities here are, symbolically, from a writing perspective, meant to be reflections of the way that Clark sees people, as furniture. Of course, the people who populate his real life are anything but stagnant fixtures. They challenge him, embarrass him, and even strip him of his home, but Clark doesn't seem to see people beyond the way that they affect him and himself alone. They have no interiority, no use beyond what suits him. They're empty. This is in complete contrast to Captain Clark, who is the most realized inside and out. In the end, once the body of Captain Clark is taken back to Async for observation, we see that the creature does indeed have a skeleton and a brain. He has interiority. This is what makes it so easy for Clark to take advantage of and eternally feel so deeply wronged by the people around him. They aren't people to him. They're tools at best and obstacles at worst. He doesn't care about his employees beyond what they can do for him. This is why he doesn't care about taking them into a place he knows is hostile and unpredictable. He had more than enough evidence with filming the threshold, but I don't think Clark actually cared about proving anything to Mary. I think this whole expedition, in which he literally cast Bobby into the pit, is a way to satisfy his own curiosity, a way for Clark to explore the depths of his own psyche. Collateral be damned. It's in this way that I believe Clark's perception have an effect on the way that these entities manifest. Not necessarily in the way that Clark regards people other than himself, but more so in how much access is granted to each person, either in the form of his own memory or through proximity to the complex itself, by which I mean the amount of revisions that are able to take place after the life form is made. It seems that the Backrooms likes to capture moments, fleeting spots of time that it holds onto to try and replicate and keep for itself. But as Clark says, each time it tries to remember, it morphs somehow, it changes. I think that the reason these entities are so passive and apparently unlearning is because they're replicating a person in a particular moment, capturing their frame of mind along with their physical appearance. This makes sense given that Red is in professional attire. Maybe she was in a state of polite anxiety while she was recorded by the Backrooms, and that's why she's so reactive. The same could be said for Archie and Six Eyes, who are both seated and in more casual attire while being much more passive. If this is the case, I think that the three of them could potentially learn and develop into creatures much closer to the likeness of the people they're based on, if only the Backrooms had more material to work with. More material, learning materials, much like the tapes that Clark produces, as well as his continued presence within the complex, are most likely what allowed Captain Clark to take the form that he does, much larger and far more human than any other life form. I think it's the combination of tapes, this mannequin, as well as Clark living within an area that the Backrooms was apparently flowing in and out of, that allow Captain Clark to have a greater level of conscience and cognition. Based on Captain Clark's perpetual, troubled, desperate countenance, I think that his mental state is built around this moment here, while Clark is filming his commercial. The most obvious indicator of this is, of course, his appearance. I don't imagine Clark dons his Captain Morgan garb very regularly, but it's also his attitude that I think corroborates this idea, particularly his animosity towards Kat and Bobby. In this moment where Clark is on the floor with Bobby and Kat standing over him, documenting his embarrassment, it's not a stretch to think that Clark might feel a bit scornful or resentful of this. This scorn and resentment, which manifests as violence within Captain Clark, who eliminates the perceived source of his and Clark's shared hurt. Captain Clark is apparently able to think beyond this moment, however. If this painting is based upon a real interaction, which I think it is, given that Clark is totally okay with Captain Clark picking him up, and is apparently pretty unafraid of him, I reckon Captain Clark is able to have an, albeit slightly, higher degree of mental dynamism because of the way that he's able to continue to learn from the original, and what Clark teaches him is a less than great example of what a good human is. I think that practically, Captain Clark is violent because Clark models violence. Captain Clark consumes Clark because Clark models consumption. Of course, in the way he literally eats Six Eyes, but also in the way that Clark models his relationships to others. In every relationship we see that Clark has, he only chooses to interact with people in relation to what they can give him, what he can consume. With Kat and Bobby, of course they work for him, but in the end he only cared about their ability to satisfy his own curiosity. This is also demonstrated in his relationship with his ex-wife. Once he began to see her as an obstacle, she stopped being important to him, or even tolerable to him. Affection isn't a factor, and maybe it never was. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but for Clark to be an aspiring architect, a stereotypically risky occupation, who chose to marry a lawyer, a stereotypically steady and lucrative occupation, it seems that Clark might have chosen to marry his wife because he saw her as a means to find stability, and as that reality became more and more obscured, Clark became more and more cruel, as he models with Dr. Mary during the therapy sessions, once on Mary's terms and then again on Clark's terms. I think that there were moments where Clark did genuinely want to do better. I believe there were times when Clark was looking for a window. And this moment here, where he's visibly at his lowest, I believe is where he must have wanted help the most, when he was the most willing to hear what Mary had to say. I think this is the state in which Captain Clark lives. I think that Captain Clark is looking for the window in a place that has none. There's nowhere for him to go. He has nothing but himself. And what good is that, really? To interpret the scene where we see Captain Clark in all his glory, I read it like this. Clark, as he sits at the table now, and perhaps as he sat in Mary's office before, wasn't really looking for guidance, he was looking for reassurance. He wanted to be told that his problems really weren't his fault, and that he didn't need to change. It was all the outside world's fault. This stagnation is familiar, it's comfortable, it feels safe for Clark. After Clark forces Mary to tell him that stagnation is okay, Captain Clark is nearly summoned, and in this moment he only has eyes for Clark. He lifts him, as he's apparently done many times before, and takes a massive bite. While at first I thought this was just the result of Clark's hubris, he thought he could tame something as unpredictable and unknowable as the entities here, but the more I mulled it over, the more I see it this way. Clark has chosen stagnation by choosing to stay within the Backrooms. He has chosen to continue to embody the worst version of himself, the version of himself that is physically embodied by Captain Clark. At Clark's resolution to stay this way, it seems that Captain Clark is disturbed by this decision, and that's what makes him make his appearance. At first, Captain Clark doesn't seem explicitly hostile, just arriving on the scene to see what's going on. It isn't until Clark tells his counterpart that they don't have to change and that there's something deeply wrong and unchangeable about them. Then, that's when Captain Clark decides to eat him, much like how Clark takes what he can from others, only to discard them once they stop providing whatever value he wanted from them. If Captain Clark is indeed the version of Clark that was at his lowest, the most desperate for change, then Clark has just stripped any chance of that ever happening away from the both of them. So, Captain Clark destroys him. Symbolically, this also functions as a representation of Clark's destructive tendencies finally catching up to him. His stagnation and surrendering to the loops he's been trapped in is a form of self-destruction. And this moment here, where the worst version of Clark literally consumes him, is a beautiful way to make that point. I also think that's why Captain Clark is so desperate to get to Mary. Captain Clark wants help, he wants out, and Mary represents the only way towards that end, so he pursues her. I don't think Captain Clark would try to destroy her necessarily, but I don't trust that he wouldn't try to consume her to somehow extract results in a similar fashion to Clark forcing Mary to reassure him. But where does this ultimately leave Mary? Dr. Mary Klein, as demonstrated throughout the film, is just as susceptible to falling into the same loops that Clark does. But the key difference between the two of them is that Mary is actively working to escape the loops that we see she involuntarily slips into. Not only is she trying to pull herself out of them, but she also wants to free others. This is why she becomes a therapist. This desire to help others break out of destructive cycles appeared to have originated with her mother, who she wishes could have helped herself for the sake of her daughter. Mary sees firsthand how being unable to escape the loop can lead to the destruction of everything around you, and this is made literal by the demolition of their home, which leaves the both of them displaced. While I've seen other people refer to Mary's self-help advice coming off as a savior complex, I think this is a bit uncharitable. The way I see it, Mary is projecting her desire to help her mother onto other people, but not in a way that's as self-serving as this may seem. Though Mary appears to have overcome at least some of her demons, she was never able to actually find the window, the avenue for possibility and progress that she urges others to be able to find, but in working to live in an inversion of her past, she continues to indirectly refer to it constantly. Yes, this is a meme, but it works to my point. Even though she's trying to heal, this is destructive. It ends up being similar to the way that Clark wishes to stay stagnant within the complex. Mary holds on to her trauma. Literally. She keeps the imprint of her hand that was the mark that she left on her home. The home that was first made inhospitable by her mother, then completely destroyed by this excavator, I think is meant to represent willful stagnation, the same way that the Backrooms do for Clark. And maybe the new housing tracts coming and demolishing it is representative of progress and change, which her mother chose to bar the two of them from. This trauma leaks into all parts of her life, especially her work. We don't know where Mary's mother is in the present day, so we can't say definitively if she is still indeed trapped, but I think the scenes where Mary's mother is admitted to a facility with a blank stare is meant to work together with this final scene of Miss Mary within the complex, buried under layers and layers of memory, now trapped within a new loop, both within the Backrooms and in the real world. While it might be giving Clark too much credit to say that he single-handedly managed to drag his therapist into a shared mental spiral, he certainly helped to kickstart the process. When Mary first lets go of the notion that she can somehow save everyone from themselves by urging them to find the new window that she never could, this is the first step out of the shadow that her past has cast over her life. This is breaking a different kind of loop. This is again demonstrated by her breaking the final artifact that she carries from her past, literally wielding it against stagnation as manifested in Captain Clark. But it doesn't just disappear, it's still in there somewhere. It's in this way that I think the settings of the Backrooms is perfectly suited to deliver the story, if that is indeed what the film is trying to say. Which, is the annoying thing. I think that the Backrooms in the A24 film are meant to represent trauma. And before you groan, trust that I get why people are sick of every horror property being an allegory for trauma or grief or whatever is cool at the moment, but people aren't tired of it because allegories are boring. Poorly done or tedious allegories are tired, and I don't think the Backrooms is tired. I think it's wired. I think it was really good. In this movie, everything inside the complex is a memory of something else. While Clark talks about this in regards to Stillife, I think the layers as shown here are a great example of how the Backrooms deals with memory. The way that each memory of a memory degrades is not a way to demonstrate the fallibility of memory, but rather it shows how memories might actually be refined based on the way the impact of these moments are preserved, not the fine details. Just look at this montage that shows the layers of Mary's childhood home. One of the first things lost is the window, one of the first things her mother took from her, the window that represents a way out of the cycle. Then we start to lose familiar things, familiar comforts. The armchair especially sticks out to me this way. Her home continues to render down until all that's left are four walls and a black hole. The only exit also represents danger, mystery, and vulnerability. Who knows what's out there? All that remains here in this place is the feeling. Why are you in this place? Shouldn't you leave? Well, you could have left when you had the chance, but you didn't take it, and now you're trapped beneath uncountable layers of memory, now stagnant, unchanging. The ending, where Phil uses Mary's own therapy speak to walk her through her own experiences, shows Mary how she's fallen back into a loop, which we see here now. This is why the still life that resembles her is formed around this moment, where she begins to feel that she is herself finally succumbing to the loops she had spent her life trying to learn to overcome. The loops that Clark would be consumed by. If you like this idea, I really recommend The Oldest View, also by Kane Pixels. So yeah, that's all for me. Love you, bye!